Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chat with Kari on Diya TV. Join me each week as I talk with filmmakers, entertainers, and artists about all things show business. My guest today resides in the Windy City and is a stand-up comedian and producer. Welcome, Vik Pandya.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, it's exciting to be here. I haven't seen you in like what feels like 10 years.
I know, right? And then we get the power of digital that we can be across the country and still communicate.
Yes, this seems more high tech than the setup that we were dealing with live at the event we were at, to be honest. So
That's fair, yes. So you started out with improv. Tell me about how you got started in that, and then how did that eventually affect your stand-up?
yeah, I when I was in college, I took an improv class just to graduate. I just needed credit. So I had no idea that it was an improv class. I was just like, I heard it was easy and I did it. And then I was like, oh, this is really fun. And they're like, yeah, you should, if you're interested in this, you should take class at Second City, which is like the world famous improv school in Chicago that has like amazing alumni like Steve Carell's, Tina Fey, Stephen Colbert. So I kind of just like tucked that in the back of my mind. I started working. And then I was like, I always wanted to do stand up. So I went to an open mic and I just bombed horrifically, as most people do at their first open mic. And then I remember that improv class I took in college, and I was like, maybe I should take more improv to get more comfortable on stage, and that will help me be a better stand up. And that's exactly what I did. So I did Second City's whole improv program. It's about a year long. And I started doing stand up again while I was in the improv program and really just hit stand up really aggressively and have never stopped since. But did the whole program at Second City, and it's really helped me from like, doing crowd work, riffing on stage, hosting. Like improv is just so good for anything in your life, whether it's comedy, it's like brainstorming, it's, presentations, like it just helps with so many things. So I am really glad I did it. And I'm a little sad I don't get to do it in a performance setting anymore, but just because I'm doing so much stand up, but I do use a lot of improv in my stand up.
Nice. Yeah, I was gonna say I've done improv as well, and I feel it is something useful for anybody of just kind of getting out of your head and being in the moment. So that's really cool. Something that's a little more heady that's interesting that you actually also started out in the business world. Where was that shift of, hey, you know what, I want to do comedy full time, and how did that happen?
Yeah, I don't think it took me like a year of doing stand up to realize I'm like, oh, I'm like a comedian. Like I'm actually making money doing stand up. I kind of was doing it as a hobby to start. Like I just was like, I'm interested in this. I want to see where it goes. I didn't start comedy thinking it would be a career. I just thought it would be something cool to do. And then a year later, I'm like, I'm producing multiple shows. I'm, traveling a little bit for comedy. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing this. This is a thing now. And that's kind of when it clicked for me. I'm like, I can work a little bit, but what I'm passionate about is comedy.
So you followed your passion. That's amazing.
Yeah. And
I feel most people are like
broke in the process. Yeah, I've always wanted to make like a living off. So I was like, I'll let me work and do comedy for like 4 or 5 years, and that's what I did. And then after the pandemic, it kind of shifted how I viewed work-life balance. And I was like, if I'm really going to hit stand up this hard, I should draw back on the work. And that's kind of what I did.
Yeah. But also, like, you have this more entrepreneurial approach of it's, some people think, oh, it's just jokes and whatnot. So how do you have that kind of work focus, but, not get burnt out on doing, because, too many people, it's sometimes your passion should be more of a hobby, because if you spend too much time on it, you might like burn out on it. So
yeah,
how do you find that balance?
Yeah, it is very difficult because people think stand up is just like, oh, you're on stage for like 10 to 30 minutes to an hour a night, and then that's it. And you go home, and it's so much more than that. There's writing, there's social media, you have to cut up clips, you got to like reach out to bookers. You're a producer, promoter, performer, you're all things. So it's so much behind the scenes work that happens that can lead to burnout. And, I'm just really good about every day I just do something comedy related. So I kind of knock out, have a task list of stuff I do every day. But I also, I started reaching out for help. Like I got a guy who helps me edit my clips. I got someone who's helping me, book travel. Like I'm trying to get people on my team so it's not all on me, because I have a little bit of a control issue. So I'm trying to relinquish some control. But it is hard when you're like, this is the cool thing about stand-up. It's all you, So sometimes you feel like I don't want to give anything to anybody else, but you got to start doing that. Otherwise you'll go crazy.
I'm glad you mentioned two things there because it reminded me of. So, you mentioned social media and then getting help, which is great because sometimes that's the other thing. Too many people focus of I have to do everything. It's like it's okay to
Yeah.
ask for help.
Yeah.
Your social media videos, which have like segments of your stand up, have such fun emojis and the closed captioning on it. How was that to like that inception of that idea of like, you know what, we should make it a visual on top of a visual.
Yeah, I think it was seeing other comics who are like further along than me doing that was kind of the impetus, but also just my whole brand and presence on social media is like very it's you can tell it's curated. It's very put together and these are like high quality pieces of content. So if everything is high quality, why should the clips be any different, right? So I was like, well, I got to continue to stand apart and continue to make people who come to my page be like, oh, this is a professional comedian. It's not like an amateur. So that was the methodology there and thinking and just seeing what has worked for other comics, like in terms of views and clicks. And that's why I got the editor because I was doing those myself. And you can only do it so well if you're not like a videographer and you don't have the skill set. So finding that person to do that, who's actually a comedian, who's in India, who's just came across my videos and was like a fan, and he's like, "Hey, I'd love to help." And then it's so funny because I'm trying to make a joke about this. I'm like, I'm an Indian in America outsourcing work to another Indian in India. So, but it's all in this family, you know. We're keeping it with us, which is good.
That's funny. Well, then also speaking of teaming up, you are also a producer with Team Us Comedy.
Yep.
I was gonna say it is Team Us, right? Because you could read as Team US, but I'm like, I
Yeah,
figured it was
team up.
us. Yeah,
Yeah,
nice.
team up.
Tell me about that. How did that come about, and what do you all do? Because it's kind of not just stand-up comedy.
Yeah, so Team Us Comedy came about in Second City. I met two other comics who were kind of in similar position to me. You know, we all had day jobs. We all were interested in comedy. They wanted to do improv. I was doing a little stand up and improv, and so we kind of bonded from that commonality. And we were like, we should produce a show together. And we have all these friends who would love to see us perform. So we have ended up producing a show in downtown Chicago in an office building, kind of reflecting a lot of the stuff that we bonded over was like this 9 to 5 kind of happy hour crowd and ended up being really successful. So we just kept doing more and they started doing stand up. So we ended up just running these shows and it just kind of grew and developed. And we ended up recording an album, a comedy album together that this is, from some of the footage you'll see is from that album. It's in a distillery. So just looks really cool. It's totally different than most comedy albums. And went #1 on iTunes and top 10 in the Billboard charts. So we just been like, really, the Team Us thing is like we can go far alone, but further together. So we've kind of been always, working with each other and trying to push each other, and that's really kind of been the mentality behind that, and it's been huge. I mean, it's the best thing I've ever done in comedy.
And you do different things like you can work with businesses as well of using comedy for team building. How did that come about with your group of like, hey, let's use stand-up comedy or comedy in general as a team building exercise and taking it another step?
Yeah, and that was also a little bit of that corporate background is like people who we knew in the corporate side were like, "Oh, do you guys ever come into like an office and do comedy in any sort of sense?" And coming from the improv background, we noticed that Second City has this whole corporate arm called Second City Works, and they come into small businesses and companies and do like team building and things like that. So we're like, we can do that, and why are we not offering that as part of our services? So we had a few workshops, teaching improv to companies, and it went really well. So we just started expanding on what we offer, and now we do that on like an ad hoc basis. And we also produce stand-up shows in any sort of environment, whether it's like a wedding, a corporate event, some sort of like MC or gala function. So it is still using comedy, and sometimes it's just like MC work, but a lot of times it is involving comedy in some sense. And comedy has all the tools for improvisation and brainstorming. Like a lot of TV shows use improv to help write, like SNL. You think about all those sketches that have been developed. That's all using improv to kind of develop and build a sketch. And so we do the same thing at that like custom level, and we do it now all over the country. So it's not just in Chicago, but we travel everywhere to do it, which is pretty cool.
That definitely sounds exciting. And speaking of unique spaces, what has been your favorite space to perform in and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. In Chicago, there's so many eclectic venues that do stand up, and the cool thing about stand up, and it's kind of like a double-edged sword, is you can do stand up technically anywhere. I mean, you just need a microphone and a speaker, and sometimes you don't even need that. Like I did stand up for 8 people in the living room last week, so it was like a
That
70th
counts,
birthday.
yeah.
It counts, but
Yeah.
it doesn't always mean it's going to be good, all because you can do it
Mm.
anywhere, right? But the thing is, there's a couple production houses that run these really cool shows that are like kind of pop up shows. So they happen in interesting venues. So sometimes it's like I did one in a plumbing shop. Then I did one in a cat bakery. Like I've done these like really random venues, and I've done one on a rooftop and like some really cool things. Probably one of the coolest ones I did was I did stand up on the at the Sears Tower, like the sky deck. I also did stand up at the John Hancock on their sky deck, two separate events, but just very cool to be like in the corner of like 100 floors up and doing comedy. It was pretty wild.
It's definitely unique for sure. And then something some comedians have a debate about, and I'd be curious on your thoughts on it. Do you prefer smaller venues, such as like the more just small comedy spaces that you can go to that's maybe 10 to 20 people, or do you like the large theaters, or even how there's amphitheaters now of like sports stadiums?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a different way of performing. I mean, when you're in a
Mm.
bigger space, it's a little slower. It's a little bit more like you're performing, you're not really interacting as much. That's why I love the clubs. Like the club, I'm a club comic, which means, intimate venue, maybe 100 to 200 seats, low ceilings, kind of everyone's packed in. The audience is right on top of you pretty much. And, there's no escaping, escaping the comedy. And so you can interact with people. You feel like an immediate connection. If the joke kind of works or it doesn't within a second. And I love that because it's kind of like you're in it. Like it feels like a live performance, not something you're just watching on Netflix, if that makes sense. So that's my preferred way to do it. Cause I also do a lot of improv and crowd work. So that works a lot better in a smaller environment.
Now, with that, what has been the best audience interaction and what's been the worst?
Mm. That's a good question. Best audience interaction. I've had people come up to me that have said really like sweet things that I just wasn't
Mm.
expecting. Like I was doing a show I think in like Milwaukee, and it was just like a random show. It wasn't like a prestigious show. It was kind of like a show I tacked on after something else, and it was in some remote part of Wisconsin. And this woman came up to me after the show, and she was like, I had like a really tough week, and like I lost my job, and like all this stuff happened, and I really needed this laugh today. And it makes you realize like sometimes you forget we're doing this every day. I do shows pretty much every day, and to me it's a job, but sometimes people are coming there with whatever else they're dealing with in their life. So that was very cool to have that experience of like, oh, you made a difference in someone else's life. And really could see like her mood had changed. She was like in a good mood, and it was very fun to be like, oh, I did that with jokes. So anytime I have an interaction like that with a crowd, it's always very fun and sweet. Conversely, conversely, also in Wisconsin, I remember this was like right after the Capitol riot, and I was doing a show in like deep Wisconsin, and just you get some people who are like I'm the only one who looks like me in this part of
Mm.
Wisconsin, and get some people who are kind of like it was a rowdy crowd. It was kind of like battling. Every joke was like a battle. Like they were kind of talkative. They were like ignoring, and it was just a lot of like there was a lot of tense moments too because I'm not gonna change my material that much. Like I'll do the job, but I'm also gonna do what I came to do. So they didn't like some of what I had to say, but it was like it's fine. That's part of the gig. You have to roll with it. And it ended up being fine. Like I think I changed some minds, which I think that was cool. But you just have to learn to deal with it. It just was funny because like a month ago, this other experience happened. So it's just funny that in comedy, you can go back to the same place relatively and have a totally different experience month over month. But that's what keeps it exciting and dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you touched upon how, if something bad happens, you just kind of have to deal with it and that you don't change your material, because that would be another question I think some people would ask is, do you adjust what you're talking about based on where you are?
Yeah, I definitely what I've been doing is I used to when I was like newer, I didn't have as
Hmm.
much material where I would just like try to not upset people, and now I figured out if you get them to like you, early on, you can kind of get away with anything. And that's the key to stand up, is just being likable, being relatable. And I've learned to structure my sets in different parts of the country in different ways, but I still will get to all the stuff I want to talk about. But I'll open a little differently, or I'll talk to the crowd a little bit more, and I'll do that. And that's all dynamic and kind of on the fly, just as I feel the audience needs it. But that way, I still will do the same jokes for the most part. But at this point, I have enough material to kind of, to make it work if I'm in a really remote area, or really, specific kind of audience. So I feel like I have enough, and then if I get them with a few, they're like, all right, we'll let you get the other ones out too, because you gave us a few that we really enjoyed. And I feel like most people are pretty reasonable. Once you get them laughing, they're not going to turn on you unless you do something crazy. So that's the benefit of doing it long enough, where you can make those decisions on the fly and you can be dynamic, because that's where the improv comes in. That's where just reading the room comes in. If you're not doing that, then you're not doing your job.
Yeah. And then a lot of your humor involves observational humor, which personally, that's one of my favorite, where people notice something and comment on it or bring light to a certain topic or isms that we do as people. How do you bring that and showcase your cultural representation into your shows?
Yeah, I think the cool thing about stand up is like you get to bring people into your world a little bit, and being, of South Asian descent, and I get to walk in kind of both worlds. Like my family, they came here for college. I was born here. So I've been to India many times, but I still consider myself more American than Indian, but I have these roots and these cultures and these values from India. So I get to kind of share that with the audience, which is cool, to be like, well, this is why this is happening. Like, but I'm coming at it from their kind of perspective in a way where I'm like, I don't know why some of this stuff is going on, but I can kind of be the bridge between those two cultures, which is very cool. And so observation, like to your point, is one of my favorites as well, because you're like, a lot of times you're just looking at something that's like, this seems weird. Like, why are we doing this? And then you explore the comedy in that. So a lot of my content is like that. Like, can we stop with this, or we should keep doing this, or maybe get rid of this? And a lot of it is just poking at things that are, accepted, or things that we just do on a day-to-day basis. And that has been, I think for me, my best material has been stuff like that, because people really resonate with it.
Yeah, I was just about to say, which you're kind of getting towards that idea is, so do you feel comedy is a way to address different issues in a more digestible manner for people?
Yeah, and I think most people now, like, it's most people don't really trust, like the media. Most people are kind of disillusioned by just like the amount of content we're consuming. So I don't go on stage with an agenda. I'm not trying to like change people's minds. I'm really just trying to make people laugh at the end of the day. But if I can make you think about something in a different way, or if I can, bring light to something that maybe you weren't aware of, I think that's huge. That's a cool thing about comedy. But it's not to say this is a TED talk. At the end of the day, it's stand up. So I really don't care. I mean, I'm stand-ups are narcissistic. Like, I'm like, as long as you're laughing, I don't care who you vote for. As long as you fill in the seat, I'm happy. But I think, and that's the cool thing about comedy, is like, I feel like you shouldn't necessarily know my personal beliefs, like, because I go on both sides. I'll take both sides just to be the contrarian sometimes, just to make the audience kind of on their toes. Like, does he support this? Does he not? But he's making us think about it, and I think that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably the better way to go. I mean, I don't know if anybody could really say better or worse, but it's a interesting way to approach it, because then, yeah, it makes the audience think and maybe question some things they understand. And then also, just you being in front of an audience is a form of representation too,
Correct.
because maybe they haven't seen a brown person do stand-up comedy.
Yeah, and a lot of times, I mean, you go to places that are smaller than Chicago, and you get that feedback. Like, I'll have
Hmm.
a couple Indian people, or a couple people who are, from a different part of wherever they're living in. They're like, they're the only people that look like them, and they're like, "That's so cool. We saw you on the website, and we knew we had to go. We never see that." So you do get a lot of that, and that feels good to be like, "Oh, I am representing just by being here." So it is something like I'm cognizant of. And, at this point, I've been doing stand up for 7 years, and like, I've seen comics come and go, and also been able to like work with a bunch of other really talented, Desi comics. And that's been really cool, just to have this network across the country of like, we all kind of know each other. We all are, in touch, and it's just fun to have a community of people that are like doing what you're doing, which is really exciting.
Yeah. And then have you had anybody come up to you after and be, you know, surprised, like they had never seen a South Asian doing comedy, and they, or even, you know, it's that thing of you have to see it to know that even it's an option that you could do as a
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, and I think two things on that. Like when I started, I think the reason that I was propelled to even do stand up was I saw Russell Peters. Like his special came out on YouTube and went viral. And this is like, 15 years ago. And I was like, it was such a good special that like I watched it with my brother. We showed it to our parents. And then that's kind of why he blew up, is because it was relatable to not just kids, but also their parents and, every generation, every age. And that was the first time I saw an Indian comic on doing stand up ever. So I think I never forgot that. And then when I did stand up myself years later, I still was able to like draw back to that, be like, oh, that really hit me in a certain way. And then I think to your point about the shows, like I've had people, other comics will be like, or like, I didn't know that was an option, or other people will be like, what do your parents think about this? That's usually the first question you get. But it's also people interested in the arts. I get a lot of people after my shows who are Desi are like, oh, I want to be a writer. I want to be a, X, Y, or Z. And they're kind of asking me, because I'm in this artistic field, like how does that go? Like, how do you navigate that? And I think it's helpful in any of that capacity. So it is cool to, whether you're doing a comedy or not, if you're considering something in the creative space, like it's okay. You don't need to be a doctor, engineer, or lawyer. You can be something else.
Nice. Keeping the options open. I like it. Yes. And so what's next for you?
So now I'm at a point where I'm doing stand up, like I said, pretty much every day. I've been touring quite a bit. I'm on the road almost every weekend, just headlining now. So what that means is like people are coming to see me. Like I'm the main act, which is great. So I'm just building my fan base across the country. I have some specials and stuff coming out later this year. I recorded a special for Dry Bar Comedy a couple months ago, and that's going to come out end of the year. So it's just kind of keeping the momentum going for me, and just touring more, meeting new fans, going to new cities. And that's what's been really exciting, is just building more content and kind of growing my social media, growing my following. But that's really it. Like I have nothing else I want to do but just keep doing stand up.
Well, it sounds like you are going in that direction and looking to seeing more of your shows.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining me. And yes, go find him on social media, because there's lots of segments to watch, and maybe coming to a city near you. Nice.
Yes. Social media on everything at Vik Pandya.
Nice. I like it. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Vik.
Thanks, Kari.
And
take care.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for watching Chat with Kari on Diya TV. Make sure to give that video a thumbs up. Don't forget to click that subscribe button. I'm Kari Lane with Diya TV, and we'll see you next time.